In a previous video, I went into great detail about different aspects of the document that you are seeing currently as a way to disprove some of the rumors and clarify some of the misconceptions that some people may have had regarding the use of an Eriophyd mite, which I mispronounced as Acerla, the genus that is. It's Aceria. It's Aceria Salsola, and that's the name. So I wanted to make sure that people were not confused through that mispronunciation. The worst and most embarrassing part about that, and it's an example that even professionals can make mistakes, certainly. I was actually aware of the genus, how it's pronounced, but I was so focused on reading this report that I felt, I read the genus Aceria as Acerla because the I and the L in this report looked very similar to me. Maybe I'm getting older, but I feel like that's, I don't know if that's a good excuse when you're only 25. So, anyways, this is an abbreviated video. I want to sort of make a brief statement, a much more brief statement, especially in comparison to the other video that I made. Because although it's important to go through all the details, because it's worth it for people to see the different details and the explanations and the technical sort of rigmarole that the California Department of Transportation and associated and affiliated bodies of the government had to go through to do their research. I think that it is just as important for people to be able to have access to a brief explanation. So here I am making that brief explanation. I'm going to start here at the abstract. I'll just read it verbatim like I did in the other video. Yellow star thistle and tumbleweed Russian thistle are two of the most important weeds on California Department of Transportation rights-of-way. They occur in high densities, outcompeting desirable grasses and increasing risk of wildfire and soil erosion. Transportation rights-of-way serve as corridors that can aid and spread of weed seeds by vehicles. Weed-infested rights-of-way can also be a source of seeds that might contribute to the spread of weeds to neighboring properties. Both these plants are alien to North America and have previously been targeted for biocontrol, but the introduced agents have not reduced these weeds in California. Release of new agents can provide widespread and perpetual reduction of weed populations without further expenditures. So, primarily, this document talks about two organisms. One is an Eriophyd mite, and the other one is a weevil. I'm going to forego explaining the weevil, although I did go into some detail, because it was one of the two important organisms sought for biocontrol. And I'm going to fast forward to page 9. I'm going to go over all of this, which if you are interested in looking at, feel free to check out my other video where I go into much greater detail. This is not for that. Okay, so page 9. So this page is often, I've seen, cited on social media as an example of the CALTRANS use of Hemp Russet Mite. For those who don't know, Hemp Russet Mite and Tomato Russet Mite and Aloe Russet Mite and this Russet Mite, this mite, they're all what are called blister mites. Blister mites is sort of a catch-all term for Eriophyd mites. They're also sometimes called gall mites, depending on how specific you want to be, because a lot of them have phytoreactive saliva, and that saliva causes reactions in the plant physiology. You can even see in this picture where they show the damage in figure 6 here on the right. You can see an infested and not infested cutting of Salsola tragus, which is the Russian tumbleweed that they're looking to control with this mite. You can see how on the right the infested plant is very gnarled, bushy. It doesn't even look like the same plant in a lot of ways, and that's pretty consistent with a lot of russet mite infestations. Broad mite also has that effect, and it has this gnarling sort of phytoreactive effect when it infests a plant. Cannabis plants and cannabis growers who cultivate said plants are probably aware of the kind of damage that hemp russet mite makes, the taco leaves or the curling of the blades of the leaves that can occur. And something similar is kind of happening here. So that's consistent with Eriophyid damage. Now, that doesn't mean that this is hemp russet mite. And in my other video, they go to great lengths, it is shown, to rule out whether or not this mite is going to go after non-target plants, because obviously you want your biocontrol to be very narrow. You don't want it to get onto your crops, which is why broad mite is a ludicrous proposition to use as a biocontrol agent. The fact that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is a main partner in this research makes me believe that broad mite, which they would be very intimately familiar with, would not be a suitable biocontrol agent. There's like 5 or 6 objectives and steps people have to go through to submit an application and be successful for a biocontrol agent. Broad mite would not be part of it. So I attribute that perhaps to a level of understandable ignorance. You know, not everyone is a taxonomist. Not everyone knows every single species. Nobody, in fact, knows every single species, I would say. So that's why you have specialists, and that's why you have people who you can go to for these resources. And that's why reports like these are very helpful to clarify. You can see very obviously that in Figure 5, the caption reads, illustration and scanning electron micrograph of the Salsola mite, Acaria salsolae. Acaria salsolae is not a synonym for Aculops cannibicola. It is not a synonym for Polyphagotarsonemus latus, which is broad mite. These are, first of all, broad mite is not even in the same family. It's a tarsenimid. It's a thread-footed mite. These are blister mites. You can tell in picture A of Figure 5 that it has the typical vermiform morphology, and that is consistent for Eriophyid mites. They tend to be very small. They tend to be about, like, I want to say 500 microns long at the longest, but oftentimes they're less than 200 microns in length, so they're quite microscopic. They're quite small. And that's why they use this micrograph here to illustrate what they look like. With enough detail to identify them. That's the other thing, is that it's very difficult for somebody to identify Eriophyids in general, and in particular, a lot of times, their host dictates what they are. The host plant is oftentimes helpful in the diagnosis of an identification for a certain mite species. If you don't have that host information, it might hamper your ability to identify. So, like, for example, if somebody were to make the assessment that they have, like, let's say they're growing cannabis and they're growing tomatoes, and there are hemp russet mites and there are tomato russet mites, it's unlikely that you would find tomato russet mites thriving on cannabis plants. They are host specific. In the same fashion, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see hemp russet mites on tomato plants. So there you have it. That's kind of my big general sort of explanation of all this. If you know somebody who is interested in learning more, you can have them check this video out or check my other video out, which I'll link in the description. I think it's really important to not grill people for not knowing something. It is, after all, true for everybody that somebody doesn't know something about anything. Anything that you want to bring up as an example, there's somebody who probably won't know very much or anything about that subject, especially something esoteric like this. And instead of getting angry or upset at people who don't know the difference, I would ask that people share this video as a way to remind them of this different species, and explain to them kindly that this is not russet mite and that they don't have any need to be afraid or worried or concerned about CALTRANS using Broad Mite or Hemp Russet Mite in some black operation that's clandestine and the intent of which is to undermine cannabis crop farmers. I don't believe that's the case. This report does not indicate that that's the case, and that's all I have. So yeah, if you have a comment or a question, leave them in the comments below. Send me a message on social media, and have a good one.